Members of the company, this is your Places call. Places, please. Places for the top of the podcast. Places, please.
Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the glitz and not-so-glam of Broadway, education, and everyday life with Uncommon Sense. Join hosts Christopher Smith and Sharna Lopez as they bring you the best stories and shenanigans that seemingly prove how elusive common sense can really be. So take a little time for yourself to hang out with the dynamic duo Charnopher, and no leaving early, because you might just miss that 11 o'clock number.
Stand by music. Music, go.
Uncommon sense, the 11 o'clock number. And we are Charnopher.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the 11 o'clock number. Good morning, Sharna.
Good morning, Christopher. How are you today?
I'm good.
We have a special guest today. I want to go right into our guest. I'm very excited about this guest. But I'm going to give him like a little intro. I know he's like giggling right now in his video box. Before I say the name, I'm just going to like do the teaser of how magical this human is. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Okay. Our guest today is a lifelong musical theater actor. He's a theater maker and an educator, which is how I know him mostly. He most recently served as lead faculty for the Contemporary Musical Theater and Film BFA program at Creatiove College, Los Angeles. And before that, as the director of musical theater at Orange County School of the Arts, which is how both of us got to meet this fabulous human. He is a graduate of Wagner College and from UCLA. He got his MFA in playwriting, which is one thing I love about this human. I always tell him he's very articulate with his words, and it makes me very jealous.
Right?
I know, you've heard it a million times. His acting credits are about 7 pages long, so I might just have to Cliff's Note version it.
Skip ahead.
He was in the original cast on Broadway of The Book of Mormon. And he was the assistant dance captain. I didn't know that.
Me neither.
One of the coolest things that I think he's done, and I want him to speak about this. He was in the Deaf West Broadway revival of Big River at Roundabout. And the other one is The Boyfriend, directed by Julie Andrews. Can't get over that one. Can't get over a direction by Julie Andrews. He's been doing some great stuff over the last several years, and recently has started his business, the Creatiove College Journey, which, knowing Scott for the last, 7-ish years, maybe a little more than that. Oh, I just introduced you. Just kidding. It's Scott Barnhardt.
Spoiler alert.
I mean, it's Scott Barnhardt. But
it's also going to be in the title.
That's true. I'm so excited to talk today mostly about that part of your life right now, Scott, because I, as a friend, as an educator, as someone who's in that same realm, I feel like this is where you're supposed to be, and you're so knowledgeable and you're so on fire with this right now. So we welcome today Mr. Scott Barnhardt to the podcast.
Yay.
Hi, Scotty.
Yay.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you for being on here. I know you're a busy guy.
Never too busy for you guys. Are you kidding? For the two of you, never too busy.
I love it. I do want to talk about how we met, Scott, real quickly, and kind of our journey together. But in my little intro, I mentioned Scott worked at OSHA, which is how I met Scott. But I also think it's funny once you meet somebody, you're like, wait, oh, you know this person, you know that person, you did this show, you were here. And so I feel like at some point before OSHA, our paths probably crossed more than one time, and we might not have known it.
At some point, especially with that Moonlight Amphitheater connection, where my
Right.
first, where I got to be in the adult ensemble, was at Moonlight, where you were likely there that summer in the kids production.
Yeah,
So I just love that there was
totally.
some, like, we have definitely been within feet of each other long before we met at OSHA.
Totally. And when you came to OSHA, I was so how do I say, not nervous, curious
Mm,
because I didn't know you as a
Yeah.
human. And I'm like, "Oh, here comes Mr. Broadway." And you know, when
right.
your name would come up in my Siri on my playlist when I was listening to Sirius radio or whatever, and I'm like, "Oh, Scott is in my car?" Well, okay, cool. And now we're going to have an office next to each other. And I will tell you, you are by far one of the coolest humans, one of the most humble people, and not only talented, but just so damn smart, man. And so I have appreciated my time so much at OSHA with you, and how much we got to play at OSHA, and just kind of learn from each other and with each other. And I'm sure Christopher can chime in with his experience, but I know for me, meeting you at OSHA and really getting to know you over those years in terms of the fun and the scary and the annoying and the frustrating, but that's how we met.
Yeah.
That was the start of our
We
journey.
should end the interview there. Like, perfect. Great. Good night, everyone.
Oh man. Well, I want
Yes.
Christopher to tell his story, like the actual day that he met you, because it
Oh,
is
I
kind of
remember
funny.
that day.
Yes. So, Sharna, well, we were all there actually together
Yeah, truly.
because it was 20, I don't know, 15, 16. We're sitting in a audition room, and Sharna and I and Jeff Paul are sitting there trying to cast this huge show of Footloose, which we're trying to put 9,000 children in, and there should only be like 2,000, but whatever. And so we're going through the pile and we're like trying to knock people out, and all of a sudden I just get really frustrated because Jeff keeps putting um these sheets back in the pile. And I was like, Jeff, what? Like, we have to get rid of people. We can't cast the whole world. And he's like, yeah, but these are my gimmies. And so I'm like, well, why do all of your gimmies suck? And right at that moment, as I'm yelling this, losing my mind, um, somebody walks into the room who I later found out was Scott Barnhardt, and didn't know that he was going to be my boss. So that was a fun introduction to hi.
It was such a good minute one.
Oh man.
But it also sort of encapsulates me a little bit. He knew
Yeah.
exactly who I was in that moment.
There was
So, I mean, it's only one facet.
That's
I
hilarious.
love
There
it.
Yes.
was,
It was funny to like walk in like at the end of that process, like to just like be dropped into the end of it and being like, "Oh, we're in the deep end.
Oh,
Here we go. Here we go."
here's
yeah,
here's what I'm
yeah.
getting myself into. Scott, I want to jump forward. We could talk about our show stories, OSHA stories, education stories, but I
Hmm.
think with you in particular, our previous episode, Christopher and I shared kind of our journey through college, how we got to college, and kind of through there, and how it takes turns or whatnot, which ties into having you here since you now run the business, the Creative College Journey. So I would love if you
Yes.
could maybe give us just a little short version of what it is. And then I'd love to kind of pick your brain about the concept of it and why you love it and why you're passionate about it. So, Creative College Journey,
So the Creative
go.
College Journey is my business, and it's my sort of coaching and consulting business. So I help families with creative applicants traverse the application process, and with that, what I'm really adamant about is that it's a goal centered process, meaning we start with what does college actually do for you? What are your goals? What are your financial needs and limitations? And then you start building a list. So it's really because what I see constantly, and I felt this a lot, particularly at OSHA, is it can become, without some clarity and without some true norths sort of guiding you along the way, it can get really overwhelming, really stressful, and really expensive. And what I sort of naturally started doing while I was at OSHA and guiding a lot of students through the process was building some curriculum and ideas of ways to sort of think about the process, because it is different for a creative. It's different for an actor. It's different for an artist. In the STEM world, you sort of get to hide behind your stats and your numbers and your research. But in the artistic world, you have to put yourself on the line. And that adds a whole other element of fear of being rejected. There's a whole other element of, if I don't get into this top school, then I'm not good enough to be a professional. And what it's just like patently false, right? College is not the end game. It's not a zero-sum game. It really is just one pathway. So for me, it's about getting students to sort of see an abundant mindset, seeing that there are multiple options, and really sort of strengthening their resilience, their perseverance, and their adaptability, because those are the things that are prerequisites to being an artist, a professional artist. You need to be resilient. You need to have perseverance. You need to be adaptable. Your
See what I said? He's so
but
articulate. I just love
Right?
but
him.
and like, funny enough,
I
your
know.
BFA,
The
it doesn't
best.
matter. Oh gosh, come on, you guys. But I think it's just so important, because I think people get caught up and hung up, and they make really impulsive decisions moving towards the
Mhm.
college lane. And I just want them to have a little more agency moving through that. So, I work one-on-one with families. I do tons of workshops and classes at schools, at events. I was just at Florida Thespian doing a bunch of workshops there. I'll be at California Thespians in a week. So
Yeah.
with that, I'm just trying to go out there and give families some sound advice and ways to approach this that doesn't have to break the bank and or make you crazy along the way.
And I love that you say families, Scott. I think that's something I really have liked watching you focus on, because it's not just, oh, conversation with a student, or I help a student, or I help a kid. The fact that you keep saying family to me is so important, because parents play just as big of a role, if bigger even, sometimes in that process, in that decision, in the support of it, in the conversation that's going on in the student's head. What are they hearing from their parents? And I love that you kind of take the whole fam in and speak to everybody,
Yeah, well, because
right?
I work with people who are very successful, smart, driven, successful humans out in the world. And, I worked with a family who, there are two doctors, mom and dad are two doctors. They're highly successful humans. And they looked at this BFA in musical theater audition process going like, I don't know. I don't know any of this. I don't know what any of this means.
Right?
So it is about educating them as much as educating the student on what to expect, because it's a really interesting thing. Because I think I see two sides of the coin. I see some students who are just taking it on themselves, and they are doing the majority of the work and decision making, moving forward. And then I see other parents who are taking on the bulk of the work. And I am always like looking
Yep.
for an 80-20, because I think this is a really
Okay.
big decision moving forward for families and for students.
Yeah.
So at 17 or 18, a student should be doing 80% of the work. Like it should be theirs. And if they're not doing 80% of
Hmm.
the work, it's usually a red flag that maybe they're not ready for college, and maybe a gap year or
Yep.
community college explorative year may be a good option for that student. Um,
Sure.
and a family, parents should sort of be in 20% oversight. These are big decisions that shouldn't just be left to a minor by themselves unchecked.
Yeah.
As
Right.
adults, we
Right.
know things that maybe they can't see down the road, and you want to sort of like
Sure.
cue them in. And so part of my job in working with families is sort of mediating that, making sure mom isn't like overstepping into that 30, 40%, when they're
Yeah.
proofreading but actually just rewriting personal statements.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
a great way to go, because it's
It's not a
ultimately a
great start. Not a
disservice.
great start
It's
for
not
that.
a great start to college. um and yeah, and again, just setting expectations, understanding how to receive a rejection, how to receive an acceptance, how to um look at financial needs. That is my other huge.
Yes.
If you're going into a creative field, I'm a huge proponent of the leanest. I'm not opposed to taking debt, but being really mindful and really strategic about the debt you take on, because student loan debt.
Which is such great advice, Scott, because we've been through that,
Yeah.
right? I actually enjoy when students come in my office and they ask, what about this, what about that, and my first question is usually financial, and they're like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, guys, it is a huge part of it, and I don't want to crush your dreams, but I think as an adult, and having gone through that, it's very real, and it's hard for them to see 5, 10, 15 years in the future if you're taking on this debt. It's a
Absolutely.
big
Yeah.
factor. So I'm glad that
And
you
like,
address that.
I don't mind sharing that I'm still paying off some of my undergrad loans. It's not a lot
Sure.
left, but
Yeah.
it's still
No, but
happening.
I
And
think
I'm
that's
3010.
normal. But I think if we can change the conversation and the viewpoint, and I feel like this is what you're just like paving the way for this, Scott. Change it where students aren't feeling so pressured like these are the only schools that fit into my box of what I want to be, and opening their brains a little bit more to the opportunities that exist. And something I also find very interesting about what you're doing is you've been working with some students that are not just performers in terms of like theater, which I
Yeah.
love. Tell me, there you've had some cool kids, right, with different
Yeah, no,
backgrounds.
I mean, as I built this out and as I've sort of built out my programming and sort of my processes, I realized they apply well beyond musical theater, acting, and performance. They really do apply to creative writers, anyone who's sort of like putting themselves on the line or are thinking about careers that involve creativity and making something new. And so, like, with all that, I've been really pleased that it's been very useful for students outside of this. My favorite that I talk about is, of all things that I did not anticipate in this past year of people I'd be working with, I worked with two football players from Orlando, and
I love
they
it.
were incredible. They were incredible.
I love it.
It was so cool to see that this work really applies to honestly just about anyone, but anyone who just sort of has that insecurity about reaching for something that feels quote unquote insecure or quote unquote like a reach. And one of those football players is going into sports management, and has like a
Cool.
dream of working for an NFL franchise team, like on the executive board. And so it was really fun to
Yeah.
just sort of like adapt my research towards his points of view, and he's found already some great options. And then another student who was a state champion wrestler on the football team, like really interesting human who also loves digital media and loves cutting films and editing films and
Love that.
wanting to help decide what path made the most sense for him. And so that's what a lot of my conversations are, just like kind of getting them out of their own way and sort of highlighting
Yeah.
paths that
Yeah.
make sense for them and curriculums that are going to help fill in the gaps of wherever they are right now, because that's ultimately the goal.
I love that. I'm gonna jump a little bit, but would you mind sharing your college story? Just because Christopher and I shared ours on the last podcast.
Yeah,
Like I've heard it a couple times, but I think our listeners would like to hear because I think it's inspiring and awesome. And again, you know that I just look up to you so much and your background and what you've done and where you've been and everything you've accomplished. But I think hearing how you got there a little bit is also
totally.
cool.
So
Okay.
I was an OSHA student. I graduated from OSHA in 1883, 1997, uh, and I I was Broadway or bust. I was sort of raised on this idea of like I wanted to get to Broadway. And my family was very supportive, but we knew nothing. We didn't do research. And granted, this is also a little bit pre-internet. So I
Mhm.
had like a book of like colleges that said like
Yeah.
what musical
Yeah.
theater programs were out there. And
I had that
yep.
too.
And I was really narrow in my vision. Um like exceedingly narrow. I applied to 5 schools. I applied to NYU, Carnegie Mellon, uh Emerson in Boston, Wagner on Staten Island in New York, and USC. And my decisions were were so silly. Like I didn't apply to any of the UCs because I didn't want to take the ACT. I didn't apply to University of Michigan because I quote unquote said, "Who would study musical theater in Ann Arbor, Michigan?" Literally, like I didn't have access to actually any sound advice about what programs might make sense for me. I literally just looked at, I sort of pulled from hearsay, whatnot. Um, and like
Mhm.
Wagner was random because my dear friend April Madigan, now April Deutschman, she was a year ahead of me and had gone to Wagner, and that felt like, oh, that's an interesting option, and it was sort of like a sort of safety backup option. Well, I went through the process. In February, I went back east for the auditions, and we went to Wagner, and it became sort of my backup, and then went to New York City to go see, and it was my first trip to New York City to go see NYU, and of course. It was like the most perfect winter day. It was like a sunny winter
Of
day
course.
in Greenwich Village,
Of course.
and fell madly in love. Don't ask me I don't
Ugh.
remember anything about NYU, but I remember Greenwich Village and being like, this is where I
Yeah.
want to be. This is the thing. And
You felt it.
fell madly in love. And again, we weren't looking at it. I fell in love with New York City. I couldn't tell you anything about the NYU
Right.
experience or program. Like very little.
Which is exactly not the point, right?
Yeah, it's sort of
of going
sort
to
of
look at
miss
a
it. And again,
college,
it's
yeah.
useful information knowing like I
Yep.
was passionate about New York. That was really useful information, but it
Yes.
wasn't necessarily applying to the school experience. So I got
Sure.
back home and the results started coming in, and I didn't get into Carnegie Mellon. I didn't get into NYU. I got into Emerson, but that didn't feel like a real match. I got into the BA program at USC, which didn't feel like a match, and then I got into Wagner. So the clear option became Wagner, but I was despondent. I was absolutely despondent that I didn't land at one of the top schools. And I'll say I hadn't really prepped my auditions for it. I had not really put in the work for that moment. I mean, I had put in lots of work on my talent and my skill at OSHA and beyond,
Sure.
but I was sort of resting on those laurels, and it came back to me, full force. And I was
But you didn't have somebody like
despondent.
focusing on that for you either
No.
to tell you to do
Yeah,
that work.
it
And so that's so
wasn't it
great
wasn't a
that
part of the
people have someone
conversation.
like you to do that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also our era.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I don't
Mhm.
think I don't look at my mom and be like, "Mom, why didn't you help me more or coach me more?" I feel like back in our day, that was kind of the thing
Yeah.
is we just did it on our own with whatever
We
knowledge
sort of
we
threw darts
had.
at the wall
And
and hope for the best.
yeah. Yeah. And we didn't have a lot of that. So I agree. I mean, it was a different time for
I
sure.
will say my favorite part looking back on that moment, you need to hear this part of the story because it's hilarious. I was so despondent at my OSHA acting class sometime that spring. I most certainly, like, we had some like acting exercise that we had to do. I most certainly did a dramatic interpretive dance with an NYU acceptance letter and
No.
ripped it up
No.
in
No.
the interpretive dance to work through my feelings about
Oh.
not getting into
I have
NYU.
not heard that part
It's
of this
my
story.
favorite. It's so it
I could just see you like doing a thing and then like
dead serious.
carrying it
Dead
and like
serious.
on the ground.
Yes. Full tilt.
Hey, whatever
Oh.
works. Work it out. Full tilt.
Full tilt worked out my feelings. But
Oh,
then, I mean, I
man.
landed
Oh
at
gosh.
Wagner and I loved my time at Wagner. And it ended up being this moment of like, I had to learn a little bit the hard way. Like, I could grow where I was planted. I would, in fact, do
Yes.
well. And in hindsight, my family could not have afforded NYU. And they would have
Right.
tried and we would have made it work, but it would have been detrimental, likely in the long run. Whereas Wagner had offered me this
Sure.
great scholarship, tons of performance opportunities, and it broadened my sort of understanding because it was a BA program. I took these. I essentially got a business minor. I took business law. I took these religion courses. I took classes
That's
that
cool.
really sort of bolstered my humanity, my spirit. And that's where it was
Yeah.
like, in the long run, I landed exactly where I needed to be. And that's where now I'm just hoping to help people land there quicker and easier.
I feel
Hmm.
like that should be your tagline, though, Scott. You'll grow where you're planted. I remember you saying that to a student while you were at
Oh,
OSHA,
yeah.
and I was probably eavesdropping into your amazing conversation about college and hearing
Yep.
that. And I'm like, I'm going to steal that because I think it's really important. It's a great mindset to have, right? You will grow where you're planted. I
Because
love
if
that.
you're walking into any of this with the elitism of like, I couldn't grow at a community college, then you're missing the point. If you feel like you couldn't
Yep, correct.
grow working a job at Starbucks, if you feel like you can't learn something at every turn of your life, then you're actually missing the freaking point. And
You know what's really
Hmm.
funny, Scott? You just said you can't grow working at Starbucks. Do you know how many times? So I worked at Starbucks in college, and I can't tell you how many times I have told stories of like when I worked at Starbucks, I learned this. Truly,
yeah,
truly. Like I
Hmm.
think that it's so important to live in that moment wherever you are and wherever you're planted and take those opportunities because you never know how that's going to be used in your future,
exactly. And
right?
that to me is the biggest point. And this like my little, my ulterior motive is to bring more growth mindset to the artist sect so that students aren't feeling like failures if they don't go to Broadway. In fact, they're just taking the next right step and growing every step of the way, either in their artistry or their profession or their industry pathways, whatever that, or using those artistic skills and transferring them to another sector or to another industry
Yep.
altogether. You get to determine what success is. And if you're in that growth mindset and you're thinking about improving and growing and learning at every step, man, I've just seen it. Life becomes better, life becomes richer, and more opportunities come your way.
Yep.
I think that's so important, Scott. And we were just talking to Kelly. We were just talking to
Oh,
Kelly,
yeah.
Sharna's
My
sister,
sister.
and yeah, and she was talking about such a similar thing. Like she's how she defines success is not how someone else defines success. And I think that you have to find how you define success for yourself and set your goals based on that, and then find your way through those journeys. So I think that's
Yeah.
so
And
important.
And if you had talked to my sister at 18 years old, she would have never said that. You know, it's like you got to live through it and or try and listen to the people who are trying to help you along the way and you find your way, but I think 18-year-old Kelly was all NYU. And you know what, Scott, she did go to NYU, and what's funny, if you ask her now if she could go back and do it again, she wouldn't have gone there,
fascinating.
which is a very interesting, and not because she didn't have a great time and she didn't get what she needed out of it, but in hindsight financially. And I think also just she loved New York. She was very similar to you. She loved the city, and she could have gone to a different, less expensive college and taken class in the city or whatever it may be. And I think you don't know
Yep.
that until you're there, and or you kind of have somebody to speak that into you while you're going through the process. Hey, speaking of the process, what age, Scott, do you think, do you like sophomores, juniors? If someone was going to use your services and contact you,
It
what age, for all of our listeners, because I know there are going to be a lot of kids that are like, wait,
It
what? I
it
got to get on
varies.
this.
Honestly, I think it makes the most sense to start really like focusing in on this your junior year. So I tend to
Okay.
start taking on, if I'm taking on any one-on-one clients or like some group clients, like I'm looking sort of end of fall semester into beginning of spring semester. of that junior year. And with that, I sort of like doing a slow rollout of the process, starting then all the way to when applications are due fall of your senior year. So, and it's not to say that we're working super intensely that entire time. It actually gives us more time for conversation, for this exploration piece. And I've got a lot of different sort of tools in my toolkit that help sort of foster those conversations and clarify those goals and those wants and those needs. And so that way, by the time we're building a close to final list by the end of junior year. So I like having a really solid like 80%, 90% lock of a list by May or June of junior year. So that this summer,
That's got to feel good for the applicant too. Like that's got to feel so great leaving your junior year and going into summer and feeling like I have a little bit of a
yeah.
handle
And
on
it's
how this
just
is going to
it's
go
time
in
with
the fall.
material,
Yeah.
right? The more you're thinking about, oh, I've got these, 4 or 5 essay questions that I have to answer, or I know I've got these audition uh, requirements that I have to think about. Then you use the summer to sort of build those out, and then in fall you're really implementing them and putting them out there. And I do find
Yeah.
the process can get really, really gnarly and really hairy if you're starting in August. If you're starting even in July,
Yeah.
it's a lot of information to process. It's roughly like 70 to 90 hours of work to
Ugh.
really do a solid application, or like a series of applications. And like 70 90
Dang.
hours, again, especially for like the OSHA students, that's not impossible. They know hard
That's a
work. They
lot.
know.
They're
Yeah,
like, I
but
got this. Yeah.
But that
It's true.
over 8 weeks versus that over 6 months are two very different experiences.
mhm.
Sure. Sure. And it's
I
so
actually want to
different than
go
when we
back
applied
and
to
talk
college.
about a couple things from before.
Yeah.
Um, One, I just want to say that clearly I'm the only person in this room that didn't get into USC. We'll just put that there. Um,
He's not
Granted, I
bitter.
didn't
Both you and
apply,
I both got into USC,
Oh, so
Scotty.
come on, you didn't
but also I
apply.
didn't apply. Yeah.
But he's still
So
bitter about it, but he's still
so
mad
there's
about
that.
it.
But
You're silly.
I
How
am.
dare
It's
you,
my own fault
Christopher
that I'm
W.
still bitter.
Smith?
Uh, and there we are. Told you, Sharna. We talked about that. He has to call me by my full name.
Every
I
time.
know.
Um,
We
but
had an episode
also
on that talking about people's names. I love that.
we did. We did. Um, Also, on a more serious note, though, back in our day, back in 1285, we only applied for a few schools. Like, I technically only applied for one, technically. And Sharna applied, I think you said two, right? Chapman and USC?
Well, I did USC and Chapman, and then I did like the UC blanket. So
Oh,
like
the
I applied
UCs.
to UCLA and UCSD and all like, but that was it. I mean, and that
Yeah.
was one
Yeah,
application. So
right.
technically like 3 applications.
But I know now people are having to apply or applying to like 25 million schools. What is your thought on that and the best way to, like, where is that in your process? Do you do a huge selection first and narrowing before? Because I know you were just talking about having a short list.
Yeah. Well, like really what I'm adamant about, I do like having a smaller list. I have a big red flag if I see, you know, 18, 20, 25 applications on your list. I flag it because,
So
and
many.
it's not to say that you can't do it, and that's not to say that students aren't
Hmm.
capable of it, but I do think there's a little bit of the law of diminishing returns, where if you're so spread out with so many applications, you're actually diminishing your why you would make sense at any of those schools. So before I even get to the list piece, it's just going back to, do you understand what college offers? Uh, do you actually know your long-term goals? Like, I want to know your goals at 50, 35, 25. Like, what are those long-term goals? And what do you bring to the table? Like, what's your aptitude? Where are you at skill level? I want to know financial limitations and financial information. And then I want to get to what are the must-haves and the wants out of a college. So getting those, like those buckets is what we call them. These I really want a school with study abroad programs, or I really want to be able to double major, or it has to have private voice every semester. Like whatever those sort of deal breakers are, and then I go to the list.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually if we've got that sort of like pyramid really set up, the list is naturally going to be a little closer to like 10 to 15 schools, because odds are those kids with schools of 2025, they're not actually doing any deep dive research on the schools themselves, and they don't actually realize that. They
Yeah.
just look at, oh, it's a BFA in musical theater and I know I want that. And no BFA in musical theater are built the same.
It's the
So
same, yeah. And what a waste. What a waste of their
and
time and money,
it
right?
goes
Like
back to that
just
scarcity mindset of like, I understand why people do it, because the numbers are crazy, especially in those really competitive schools. Um, they're,
Mhm.
like a place like University of Michigan can have upwards of like 3,000 applicants for 16 spots,
Oh,
right? So you're dealing with very, very high competitive rates. So you're having to sort of adjust your um, point of view accordingly. But once I get to that list of where we're at, if we're getting into the 2025 range, I then want to break it up in some way and make sure you've got a diverse list. So I love reach schools. I'm a big fan of reach schools. I just don't want your entire list to be full of them. I want there to be some targets. I
Mm-hmm.
want there to be some schools that there's a relatively safe assumption. And you can look at numbers. There's data out there that let you know that a campus maybe is 70% acceptance rates versus 8% acceptance rate. And with that, and it's not to say that you'll still get a yes from them, but you're just wanting to diversify your list. And then on top of that, most students that I work with, I make sure that they have a community college uh, plan. Like, if none of these schools
yep.
work out or their financial plan doesn't work out, what's your community college route? Like, what? And to have it's free, y'all. It is free. It's great exploration, and there are so many ways to actually navigate a community college into a 4-year university. And then all of a sudden, that same degree is literally half the cost, especially here in California with the Cal Grant programs.
Yep.
And there's so many reasons to at least consider it, and have it as your backup plan.
Is there still a stigma? I'm sorry, Scott. I'm sorry. Is there still a stigma with it? Like I know like for a while, especially when I first started at OSHA, community college was like looked down upon. And I feel like when I went through Chapman, I even took a few classes at the local community college because I couldn't get them into my schedule. And we would have the same professors. Like there'd be the professor at Chapman teaching
Yep.
the same class at Santiago Canyon College. And is that kind of turning around? Are you noticing that at all in
I
some of
think
your
the
applicants or
stigma
families?
is lightning. I think it is actually. I think it is less perceived as like a downgrade, or like you're not. But I do think elitism eh, pervades. Like I don't think it's an. I
Yeah.
see a lot of people who
Yeah.
really like, they wouldn't even consider it, because if their student has worked so hard in high school, why would they then? But I to me it's we live in the most abundant time of education, and let's just
Yes.
s- cool cool it down. Let's simmer.
Simmer down.
Let's bring
Simmer
that temperature
down.
down
Everybody.
and look
Medium rare.
and
Medium
look
rare.
at our options. And you have to consider community college is a great option, for that very reason.
Yeah.
And I say, especially for students who are still maybe a little unsure of what route they want to take. If they have multiple
Yeah.
interests, community college can be a great. I just did a interview with Adam Castrillon, who went to Irvine Valley College and transferred to UCI,
Great
and they
school.
have a direct. He didn't have to apply to UCI; it was a direct feed into their BA drama program.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
he's
That's
set to
cool.
graduate on time. He's walking away debt free, and he's all of that
Ugh.
savings that he's done. He's putting towards his ultimate goal, which is moving to New York and starting his life and career in New York. And
Good for
this
him.
4 years has been a great testament, and it's not been without hiccups or that it's been easy, but he is so clear about what it is he's after, and he's moving all the artillery towards that goal, which is getting to New York.
I love that. Oh, that kid, he's a
Yeah.
great kid. I think too, I noticed pre-pandemic. So this was years ago. We haven't had enough kids go away to college
Yeah.
yet to like, judge. But before the pandemic, I remember there were a couple years there where I had some super high achieving students get into their dream schools and so excited and all the celebrations and all the sweatshirts and all the things. And so many of them came back either at the Christmas break or they did 1 year and they did not like their school. And they were like, it was not what I expected. I was not happy there. And it was really kind of mind blowing how many students just got there. And I kept saying, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. You are literally 18 years old. You don't know what you don't know. If you do your homework ahead of time, you're going to have a little bit more of an understanding, right? If you go through Scott's process, the Creative College Journey, and or talk with whomever, but kind of talk it through, I think that it's so much more helpful for these students to have more of that information going into it, because that does happen. You get out there or you go wherever you're going and you're like, dude, this giant USC college is
Yeah.
not for me. It wasn't my jam. And so I haven't seen it yet post pandemic, but there were quite a few students who
And it goes
went through
back
that
to the
early on.
adaptability piece. And I think it's really important for artists to sort of like survey the ground, like permission to not pin your entire adult life on the dreams of a 16-year-old. It's cool to be like, I want to go to Yale.
Yes.
I want to go to Yale, and then maybe get to Yale and be like, maybe not for me.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
having
Permission to do that,
really
right?
look at those options. I mean, also permission to persevere through it or to find your way. But I think it's getting into the all or nothing thinking about college. Like, if
Yep.
I don't get this degree from this, no one cares, especially in the creative field. No one cares.
Dude, it's so true. And I love that we have so many people. I have so many friends ranging from no college experience to multiple master's degrees who are all doing the same exact thing. And I love telling those stories. I have friends that never even attended one college class that are crushing it on
Yeah.
Broadway. And I have friends who have multiple degrees from multiple universities crushing it on Broadway or crushing it in whatever performing industry or creative industry, And I think it's so good for kids to
Yeah.
see that and be like, there's not one
There's not one
way
way. It's your
there.
next best step. And if you can keep
Yeah.
moving your feet forward and looking at the pathways that are opening up for you, there's just so much more. Again, keep going back to, like, I want you to enjoy your life. I want you to enjoy
Yes.
the idea that you are a creative, that you have ideas, that you want to put things out into the world, and not letting these institutions sort of tamper that because of that sort of
Mhm.
limited thinking.
Hey, I want to ask a couple like Scotty B personal questions. And this might, I don't know if you could pick one because I know you obviously went through Wagner and then through your master's program at UCLA, which I'd love to hear more about that. When I found that out, first of all, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense why he could write like the most eloquent email and speak for 3 hours on a podcast and just use all of the right vocabulary. I just love it. I won't say it enough. What, maybe not your favorite class, but what do you think was one of the most beneficial courses you took throughout your college time? And it doesn't have to be artistic. I know you mentioned some of those other classes that you're able to take, but is there one that stands out to you in your college career that was like, dang, that class was awesome?
The one, and it's so funny because I am not particularly religious, but it was a religion class at Wagner, and I took it was
Okay.
called Death and Beyond, and it looked at world cultures and world religions and the death rituals and the ideas of how different religions think about death and how they prepare. Like, what are those ceremonies? What are those? And that class, it was taught by one of the most iconic teachers at Wagner, Dr. Kelber. He was this like Jesuity, really funny, bearded, like just this wise man. And his lectures were
Love it.
incredible. And it was one of those moments
Ugh.
that it just like cracked open my which my, sweet little wasp from Orange County that I am, It really did. It broke open my thinking about that, and
That's cool.
I loved that class. And Wagner's a predominantly or Staten Island has the most. This is a fun fact. Staten Island has the most Catholics per capita than anywhere in the country. So it was also really
Interesting.
interesting watching him converse with a predominantly Catholic class on world
Love
religion.
that.
So like also there was like an element
Love
of
that.
like watching other students watch their worldview crack open, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
then similarly at UCLA, so many years later, I took a Chicano theater studies class um,
Ooh.
with Jose Valenzuela, who's just an icon of LA Chicano theater, and to learn a history that's specifically regional to Los Angeles, and to hear it direct from the source, someone who had been there, to actually really understand how theater played a huge role in the Cesar Chavez unionization of farm workers,
Yeah.
to see how theater played a role in that was absolutely thrilling. I loved, and it was an undergrad class. It wasn't built for the graduate students. It was me and a bunch of undergraduates, and I loved that class. Loved it.
Ah, I love that. I love when you have a good, like, obviously the material is great, but like you mentioned, the professor, that when they're just
Hmm.
engaging and they're so good at what they teach and they're open to that
Yeah, I love
conversation.
it.
I love that. How about jumping from school and college for a minute and we'll go to kind of performing. And I always ask this question and I feel like it's hard to answer. And I hate saying what's your favorite show or your favorite role, but do you have a role or a show, or maybe two if you can't choose, because I know there's like 25 for me when I talk about it, that maybe was the most challenging or the most rewarding or the most fun, anything that like stands out to you in your life? It could be from when you were young to
Yeah,
now.
I mean, there's two that come to mind. I mean, carte blanche, like the Book of Mormon experience was like the brass
Yeah.
ring that I wish everyone could have that experience of what it was like to be sort of in the middle of a this cultural juggernaut. Like it was just
Yeah.
such a moment, yet backstage it was just our quirky little show. So there was some really
Oh,
cool experiences within the Book of Mormon experience, but to the role that actually comes up more as like the challenge, and what I learned the most from was playing Cosmo Brown in Singing in the Rain
I knew you were
at
going to
Goodspeed
say
Opera
that. I
House,
knew you were going to say
because
that.
it was so
Of course you
hard,
did.
it was so fun. um I learned how to flip off a board. uh
That video's like everything. We might have to like somehow cut it into our
I'll
podcast.
send the link. Like it was physically demanding, it was emotionally demanding, and there was this like side lesson that I learned, and I'm probably still processing. Truth be told, I got the worst freaking review ever in Variety in print,
Oh,
and it
Oh.
shoot.
was it like
Mm.
seared in me this. And I remember, bless Frank Rizzo. Hey, how's it going? If you're listening to this, Frank Rizzo,
His name is never
no,
leaving your
it's
mind.
not, because it was so unbelievably painful. And it was this uh Scott Barnhart struggles. I remember it word for word. Scott Barnhart struggles mightily under the wordplay, and in Make 'em Laugh, he didn't. It was like a knife
No. No, that's so
through my
mean.
spirit. And but
Oh,
like the flip side
that's the
is it
worst.
was the pits, and this is why kids don't read the reviews, because they don't matter,
Correct.
but they can really harm you, and it
Hmm.
Yeah.
harmed me. And
Oh,
we had a long run. Goodspeed has like sort of like 3-month runs. So this was like week 2 of a 3-month run. And I was like,
oh,
how am I going to face this quote unquote failure? How am I going to do this? And you know what I'm really proud of about that performance in particular was I did. And by the time we got to the end of that run, I had grown, and I had found even more of my version of Cosmo, and had
You
I did.
persevered.
I absolutely did. Now, there was
Yeah.
still like I've been working through that criticism for 15 years, which is wild.
Isn't that crazy
Wild.
how two paragraphs, one sentence, it doesn't matter? It is, I think it's as people, as humans, but definitely as performers, because, like, kind of to come full circle, anything creative, especially performative, you put yourself out there to be judged. And you know that
Yep.
that's part of it. You know that that's coming, but it does not make it any easier when you feel like, I have put, like, it's one thing for somebody to maybe not enjoy the performance or not like it, but to be that direct with their words, that's got to sting. That's got
And
to be
while it
hard.
was their opinion, right? It's absolutely
Sure.
fair to have your opinion about it. What I knew to be true is that it wasn't actually my truth. I was funny in the freaking number. And
I'm sure you were
That's right.
funny,
and
and I've
in
seen the video.
and in
That's
So,
right.
Mr. Rizzo, wherever you
and
are,
in my own way, and it was one of those wonderful, I had to reclaim it. I had to find, because I didn't have a choice, and we talk about this a lot
Yeah.
with, like, when I used to train swings at Book of Mormon, I would be like, they would be really overwhelmed of learning 4 tracks or learning 8 tracks, and we would just sort of say, you don't really have a choice. This is the gig. You're
Yeah.
going to learn it.
Yeah.
And I had to get up on
Totally.
that stage and do it again and enjoy it. And in that, I won. I absolutely persevered on that. So that's what comes up.
When my students ask like that question, they always ask me that question too, and I, it's you're racking your brain. Favorite roles? What's some of that? I always come back to Peter Pan, which is hilarious. And every time I say that, the kids are like, "What? Like, you've done all these fun roles, all these huge dance shows." And yes, they all served their purpose and some were much more fulfilling. But playing Peter Pan by far was the most difficult thing I have ever done in my entire life. And until you play that role, you don't realize that freaking you're on that stage for the first 45 minutes of the show is you running around like a crazy person and belting a C while in a harness,
Flying
no
through the
water. I
air.
mean, yes, I had to have a sippy cup of water in the doghouse. So when I like hid in there, I could like drink. It was so physically demanding, and it's Peter Pan, but it's crazy how certain roles and certain things you do, certain shows. I remember when I was cast as the witch in Into the Woods in high school, and I thought my whole life, my dreams had come
Yeah.
true. I loved that show. I loved it. And I went on to do Into the Woods several more times. But in the moment, I'm thinking this is going to be transformative. It really wasn't. It was a great show. I love that music. I loved doing the makeup and all of that. But there are certain things you kind of step into and you're like, whoa, like doing Dames at Sea. We talked with my sister when we interviewed Kelly a few weeks ago. Dames at Sea, come on. That show is so huge for me because it was with my
Oh,
sister. And you have that, you
yeah.
know what I mean? Like those memories. And I think that's one of the coolest things about theater and performing in general is just, that's my favorite part of directing and teaching too. I tell these kids, it doesn't matter if you are the lead or if you're ensemble member 42. This experience, you are going to remember the friendships and the connectivity and the collaboration.
Yeah.
And I love that sometimes it's not the show we think it's
No,
going to be.
it's about those
right?
ethereal moments. It's about those connections. It's about, like,
Yeah.
I think about dancing in White Christmas in Detroit, where we were in a like house of like 4,000, and there would be audiences of like 400. Because it was like
Shoot.
during like the whole car crisis. Like it was a moment in Detroit when we were doing White
Dang.
Christmas, but actually dancing that choreography, I remember the feel of flying. Like I remember the feel of that, of being joyously dancing. And I was third from the back. I was not like I was in the ensemble, and it didn't matter because I remember the feeling, that connectivity feeling of flying in that choreography.
I love that. And I love getting together. Like I have a group of girlfriends that we met doing theater when we were in fourth and fifth grade. We're still friends. We're in each other's weddings and we still see each other. And when we get together and talk theater, because, we did theater from elementary school through college and even professionally. I love it because some of these you forget what sticks with people and what, like you said, you felt like you're flying, or I remember this certain time I did whatever. And it's just so fun to go back and like relive those moments because they do stick with you. And, whether they're bad or good, but they're there. It's part of It's part of your background. I love that.
Yeah. Wait,
love
Christopher
that.
Smith, I want to ask you, being predominantly
Yes.
on the other side of this experience, right? I know you've performed as well, but I'm curious, do you have like a version of that in your uh either as an MD or as an accompanying? I'm like curious like your experience on
Yeah.
it.
Like the most challenging type of thing. Actually, Scott Barnhart.
Yeah, and something that you really remember. Oh God, it
I
was
think
my
we'll start
fault,
with the
wasn't
most
it?
challenging.
You walked into this one, Scott. You walked
Um,
into this one.
You did, and you were a part of the most challenging moment of my we'll say my professional
Of your
life.
career.
Yes, thus far. Please let's not have anything more challenging. Sweet Charity, and that orchestra situation
Oh,
was
yeah.
was a moment for various reasons. It was the first time, and I at that point I had, music directed hundreds of shows and conducted orchestras and everything, but the challenge of what to do when people aren't able to accomplish the things you need to accomplish, and then trying to solve a situation in which there's no easy or clear solution is
Yeah, that was
is a
tough.
challenge.
Yeah.
And but I think what I learned from that was I think that's when I really was like, well, it's this show is literally opening in 2 days and we got to figure it out. And that's when you just pick a lane and you go. Was it the right choice?
Yep.
Probably. Was there
Yeah.
a better
Yeah.
choice? Maybe. I don't know what it is. Even looking back, I still think that we chose the best option we could to get that show on its feet. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just a little background. We had a situation where, through no fault of their own, the students were not set up for success. We had a student orchestra, and it was sounding like cats screeching on a chalkboard during tech. So we just had to figure out the best way forward, and we did. But that was the most challenging for sure. I'm trying to think if I have a most like memorable. I
Or
have
like one that was the most fun for
a
you to play. Like
fun.
which one did you enjoy
You know what?
doing
One
the
of my favorite
most?
shows to play. I have two shows that I love to do. One is Spelling Bee. I've done that a handful of times,
Yeah.
and it's just such a fun show to do. And I like it because it's such a small cast, and the way that the show is written, it just it if you really lean into all those kooky characters, the cast becomes so close, and their own little like casts become close a lot. But there's been something about that particular cast numerous times that I've done it that's just like a little gem, a special little moment.
It's an
Um,
intimate show for
it is.
sure.
I just love Spelling Bee. I love playing it. I love working with the cast. It's such a small, fun show, and they just get so close. So it's just a fun experience that can happen in other shows, but it seems to be the most true in that show that I've done so far. And then my
And then what's
other
your favorite one to play?
yeah, my favorite one to play is definitely Chicago. I mean, there's a couple that are super fun, but I think what I love the most about it, and I've talked a little bit on here about my brother and I doing duo piano. And so I always have a love of the two piano work. And that show actually has two pianos, and I've got to do it before with my brother as well. So that's been fun.
Yes.
That's so fun.
I love, you know what, Christopher? I've done that show with you, and I
Mhm.
love that you get to be involved. And I think it kind of has the performance
Yes.
side of Christopher W. Smith.
Yes.
That, you're not just playing the piano and kicking butt
Yeah.
that way, but like, I remember in our production, like, one of the kids took your hat and like, you're part of the thing and you get to be part of the group, which is fun.
It's so fun.
Yeah,
I
I
love
love that.
love
Oh,
it.
and Rent, also super fun to play. Rent was probably one of my other
Ooh.
most fun
Okay.
shows to actually play.
You know what's funny with Rent? I love Rent was like my high school years. I
Same.
could sing every line
Every
from
word.
that show. Oh gosh, I loved it, and I feel like that's an album that I can play out, and I could just listen to it and listen to it and listen to it. I love the music in that
Same.
show.
Same.
I
Same.
just-
Same.
Na 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 na
Super
na na
iconic.
na 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 na.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so of its time, right? I tell the students now, like Rent
Yeah.
was my Hamilton.
Easy.
You know, it
Absolutely.
It just totally. And they're like,
everyone
what?
knew it.
How old are you? Oh my gosh. Okay, we are out of time, so I'm going to close this out. But firstly, Scotty B, thank you so much.
Yes.
I enjoy talking with you just as a human, but I truly love hearing from you. And I am very excited about this business of yours, the Creative College Journey. If you want to learn more about Scott and his business, you can visit his website, www.creativecollegejourney.com.
Correct. That's the one.
Awesome. He's also
Nailed it.
on Instagram. He also has a podcast where
Yes.
he interviews some awesome kids or now adults, young adults who've gone on through the college process. So especially if you're listening today and you hear this and think, man, I'd love to hear more, check him out. He's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Christopher,
Yeah.
anything else before
Take
we
it
go?
home. I don't think so. Just subscribe on the YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Check out our website, uncommonpod.com. And I think it's that time, Charnopher. Charnopher out.
Charnopher.
Charnopher.
Bye, everybody.
Oh my gosh, that's the best.
Charnopher.
I love it.
This concludes another episode of Uncommon Sense. If you're ready for more of this fresh, hilarious, and unique perspective on the world of entertainment, education, and life, be sure to subscribe right now to catch every episode. If you gasped, laughed out loud, or even snorted, share the show with your friends and aspiring entertainers because, let's be real, sharing is caring. For more Charnopher, tune in to their witty insights by checking out the website uncommonpod.com or connecting on social media. Tune in next week and get the real insider scoop on another episode of Uncommon Sense.